Parry. 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 When Hideo Kojima, creator of the Video game, first wrote the official rulebook of gaming, he filled the first page thusly: any melee combat system in existence will, without exception, be improved by the addition of a parry mechanic. Furthermore, any real-time combat system with a parry mechanic would be made worse if that mechanic were to be removed. This quote is a 100% verifiable fact, and if you think I'm making this up, then prove me wrong. Point to any melee game that either has a parry and would be better off without it, or doesn't have a parry and wouldn't be made better if it had it. Parrying has to be one of the most satisfying things you can do in games. It's the most instantly gratifying skill-based mechanic ever. It doesn't take the sustained coordination of a massive combo in DMC or a killing spree in Call of Duty. Just one split second turns you from a regular schmuck into a gamer god. A lot goes into the parry systems of every game though. You need to think about the parry window, indication, controls, rewards, drawbacks, and of course, sound. Here's a list of the top 3 sounds in the world: the sound of peace in our time, the sound of Morgan Freeman whispering sweet nothings into my ear as I fall asleep, and this. As somebody who's played Sekiro roughly 100 times, it's honestly unbelievable that a sound that sharp and that constant throughout the game still hits like it did when I first booted it up. Sekiro's parry sound is so distinct and its combat filled with so many memorable patterns that if I played the sounds from a certain fight, you'd probably be able to tell what it was without even seeing it. In fact, let's try it out right now. What is this sequence of attacks from? Yep, that's the Genichiro Flurry attack. What about this one? That one's from the absolute GOAT of From Software names, Long Arm Centipede Giraffe. And what about this last one? That one was Dad's belt. Wow, you got that quick. You must really have that attack pattern nailed down. Of course, the sweet symphony of a string of parries only really works if you give the player good visual indications and appropriate parry windows. Visually, you don't need too much, just clear and distinct motions that the player can read easily. Even if it's not a natural action that anyone would do in real life, most attacks just need that strong, readable motion, which means that you should also try and limit how much visual clutter is on screen if you want a strong focus on parrying. I'm really enjoying Wolong Fallen Dynasty right now. In fact, it's the reason I made this video, but that game combines some of the complexity and mountains of effects from Nioh with a Sekiro-like focus on parrying, and it creates situations where parry timings are complete guesswork because the thing you're fighting is completely covered up by visual effects. While simply distinct animations are enough for any regular attack that you could parry, block, or dodge, there needs to be a much more obvious sign for attacks that are unblockable. The game's gotta yell out, "Yo, I'm about to kick the shit out of you, you better be ready." Sekiro has kanji symbols, Thymize uses different colored attacks, and other games opt for a little colored flash. You obviously need something to denote that this move needs to be handled in a specific way, but because they're usually associated with the longest windups, having an exact point to react to is crucial. So personally, I like it when a little light tells me at what point in time during the attack I should be reacting to. What's also crucial is the construction of the timing window. Generally speaking, the length of this window, essentially how forgiving it is on your timing, should be influenced by 2 things: how much of an emphasis parrying is meant to have on the combat, and how much of a reward you gain from each parry. The largest window should be for games with a high emphasis on parrying and a low reward for each individual parry, and the smallest window should be for the exact opposite. In Dark Souls, parrying is extremely finicky and has pretty tight timing because if you can actually pull it off, you can beat its final boss with an incredibly mediocre weapon in under 10 hits. Parrying is just one of the many viable options in Dark Souls, with more popular means of avoiding attacks being dodge rolls and blocks, and each one gives you a free hit at the enemy that deals massive damage, so fittingly it has a window that's about half of Sekiro's, which for how tough it is actually incredibly generous with its timings. Here's a visualizer of the parry timings in Sekiro by Alexander Shishakov, a name that I definitely said wrong. There's nearly half a second of leeway for your counter, a number that's verified in the game's wiki and other sources online, which sounds ridiculous, but that wide range is fitting because Sekiro is all about parrying, and each one is only as effective as you let it be. The main benefit of a parry in Sekiro isn't a large opening for an attack, it's to just chip away at an enemy's posture bar, which, if they're high on health, regenerates very fast. Under 10 parries leads to victory against Dark Souls' final boss, but 10 parries against a mid-game boss in Sekiro can give you absolutely zero advantage if you ease up and let his bar recover. Clearly, we're not dealing with the same thing here. Higher emphasis, lower reward, larger window. To avoid any kind of abuse of the system though, Sekiro's windows are greatly diminished if you recently press the parry button without actually parrying anything, either blocking the move instead or realizing that you'd gone too early and resetting. Enough of a punishment is dealt to the window through this that you can have the parry animation and recovery be roughly the same length as the parry window itself, but still not let the player get away with cheesing the game. That's how Sekiro can be incredibly fast-paced with a large timing window and still rock your skull with every boss the first time you play it. Wo Long is interesting because its demo actually had a smaller parry window than the final game does. I think the devs heard the feedback that having such a necessary action be this tight timing-wise was a bit unfair, although it also seems to have an earlier leaning window, which is kinda weird. In Sekiro, you can parry right as an attack lands. In fact, that results in a perfect parry that does more posture damage, but in Wo Long, you sort of need to parry the attack before it actually gets to you if you want to time it right, which is fine, I guess, if you get used to it, but it does feel sometimes like I'm meeting an attack right at its apex and getting shafted for it. The actual placement of the window probably messes with players more than anything. It can lead to a lot of moments where you swear you got the timing right and instead get flung through the air like a ragdoll. That's the other thing about Dark Souls. The parry timing is so difficult to nail because the actual point where the parry begins is a fraction of a second and short animation removed from when you actually press the button, which makes it a headache to try and understand at first. Depending on what your reward is for parrying, the game also needs to give you an appropriate counter for if you mistime it. Usually this is pretty easy. If you parry the enemy, you get an opportunity to do damage. If you miss the parry, you get smacked in the head. Pretty straightforward. Except when it isn't. Fury's parry system is still simple, but it's all about health. Missing the parry means you take a hit, that's normal, but if you get the parry timing right, you don't actually get any offensive advantages, you just get your health back, so it's an entirely defensive maneuver instead of a transition into offense, but it can save you from very tight spots. The one downside to this is that there's no reason to actually parry if you're at full health other than the rhythmic calluses that you built up playing the game. It kinda sucks to keep doing the right thing and have it reap no rewards because you were already in a good position. You can apply somewhat of a similar critique to a smaller degree to Sekiro's system, as amazing as it is, because all parries, including perfect ones, still raise your posture. Now, a key thing to note is that you can never get posture broken if you parry every single attack. You need to make a mistake to get posture broken, but let me give you two scenarios. In the first, the fight has just started, you try to parry an attack, but you block instead. In the second, the fight starts, you parry multiple attacks perfectly, and then eventually you block instead of parrying. The punishment in the first example is that your posture gets nudged up a bit, but the punishment in the second is a full posture break. Even though the mistake was the same in both, and in the second scenario you actually performed exclusively positive actions beforehand, I really like how Wo Long spun this posture bar. Negative actions such as unleashing powerful attacks, missing parry timing, spamming dodge, and getting hit bring you closer to the left edge of the bar where your spirit will be broken and you'll be easy pickings, but positive actions like landing regular attacks and parrying bring this bar up. Bars like this honestly deserve their own video. I guess I could call it Genius Verified. You'll get that joke in about 5 seconds. I feel like we've gotten a lot of these recently, and plenty of them are tied directly to parries. Thymesia is another one. It sort of has two layered health bars, a white one that slashed down through parries and regular attacks, and a green one which is the opponent's real health that you target with heavier spirit attacks. I think this is a good example of where the reward and the counter to that reward feels a little less thought out. Your reward for parrying is really just being able to open a bit more of the opponent's true health bar, something that regenerates pretty fast no matter what. On the other hand, if you block instead of parry, then you take a small amount of damage through that block. The reward for parrying is pretty low, and the punishment for not parrying is a little bit high. I think if they wanted to keep this dual health bar system, then they should have applied it to the player as well, with blocking lowering your white health bar to reveal a green one, essentially opening you up to take a certain amount of damage, although you'd be able to avoid actually taking that damage if you manage to back off and regain your white bar over time, or if you parried an enemy's critical attack that would have otherwise slashed off all that health. That way you sort of tier the advantages and disadvantages, kind of like how your offense is tiered. No parrying or blocking makes you take damage, blocking opens you up to a decent chunk of damage, but you can avoid it through skill or spacing, and parrying lets you avoid being in that situation altogether with a bit of an offensive purpose as well. Plus, it's really key in saving you if you've had your white bar chipped down pretty low. Personally, I think that would have been a better system overall, but parrying in Thymesia still feels good because, I mean, it's parrying. Parry systems have been implemented in so many ways already, and it can only get more creative from here. We've seen games that let you parry with swords, bubbles, and shotguns. Games that utilize different button mappings to fit it differently in the flow of battle, parrying with the block button, parrying with the dodge button, parrying with the attack button. Games that feature alternatives to parries like counters, Goomba stomps, and perfect dodges. And most importantly, we've seen developers take the gloves off and let you parry everything. Parry this sword, parry this kick, parry this arrow, parry this lightning, parry this bullet, parry this fire. Nothing's off limits. As long as you can step up to the challenge of timing, you will be rewarded. It's making action games faster, more aggressive, and more of an intricate dance. And at this point, if you don't have this feature, you're just falling behind.